Some journeys are so powerful they outlive the civilizations that created them. We are about to embark on an epic voyage through 25 of the greatest mythical quests ever told. From the sun-baked deserts of Mesopotamia to the misty forests of Celtic Britain, these stories of heroes, monsters, and impossible tasks have captivated humanity for thousands of years. By the end of this journey, you will understand the universal human desires that forged these legends and why they still speak to us today. We will uncover why a king sought a plant that could cheat death itself and what a magical fleece had to do with the very first maps. What forgotten dream from your own life feels like a quest waiting to begin? A king's demand sent a young hero across an unknown sea. Jason's quest for the Golden Fleece was not a simple treasure hunt, but a journey that would push the very limits of the ancient world. To reclaim his stolen throne, he had to retrieve the fleece of a divine flying ram, a prize held in a land at the very edge of the map. His first task was to build a ship capable of surviving the voyage. That ship was the Argo, a vessel of legendary design, said to be crafted with the help of the goddess Athena herself. Its crew, the Argonauts, was a gathering of the greatest heroes of the age, each with a unique power. This was not a lone warrior's errand, but a coordinated expedition. Their first great challenge was a passage guarded by the Symplegades, the clashing rocks. These massive stone islands would crash together, destroying any ship that attempted to sail between them. Jason released a dove to fly ahead, watching as the rocks snapped shut, clipping the bird's tail feathers. Timing the lull perfectly, the Argonauts rowed with all their strength, the Argo barely scraping through as the rocks slammed together behind them, forever stuck open from that day forward. Beyond the rocks, they reached a strange and sorrowful land where a blind king was tormented by the Harpies. These winged creatures with the faces of women would swoop down, stealing or defiling the king's food before he could eat. Two of the Argonauts, the winged sons of the North Wind, drove the foul creatures away, earning their place as more than just muscle on this voyage of the mind. Finally, they reached Colchis, the land of the fleece, but the final guardian was the most formidable, a massive, sleepless dragon that coiled around the base of the sacred oak tree, its eyes never closing. Through cunning and the help of the king's daughter, the sorceress Medea, Jason overcame this last obstacle. Medea used her knowledge of herbs and potions to lull the beast into a deep, enchanted sleep, allowing Jason to seize the glittering prize. But why did this story feel so real to the Greeks who told it? Historians see in Jason's voyage a possible memory of the earliest Greek explorations into the Black Sea. For centuries, that body of water was a terrifying mystery, a place of strange currents and even stranger people. The clashing rocks could be a dramatic retelling of the treacherous, narrow Bosporus Strait, the gateway to that unknown sea. The Golden Fleece itself might represent the incredible wealth those early explorers found. Perhaps the gold panned from rivers using sheepskins, a tangible treasure that justified the immense risk of such a journey. The myth of Jason and the Argonauts is not just a fantasy, but a map of human ambition, charting the moment we first dared to sail beyond the horizon. While Jason sought a single, glittering prize, another hero's journey was defined by its destination, a simple longing for home. Homer's Odyssey charts the 10-year voyage of Odysseus, a man whose clever mind was both his greatest asset and the source of his greatest suffering. After the Trojan War, his voyage back to the island of Ithaca became an endless series of detours, each one a brutal test of his spirit. The first true warning of this strange new world came with the Lotus Eaters. His crew, desperate for supplies, encountered a peaceful people who offered them the lotus fruit. To eat it was to forget home, family, and purpose, to be lost in a blissful, apathetic haze. Odysseus had to drag his men back to the ships, physically forcing them to remember the lives they were fighting to return to. It was a battle not against a monster, but against oblivion itself. Soon after, they faced a true monster, one that redefined the meaning of savagery. The Cyclops Polyphemus was a giant with a single eye, a creature of pure, brute strength who cared nothing for the gods or the laws of hospitality. When Odysseus and his men were trapped in the Cyclops cave, it was the hero's famous wit that saved them. He told the monster his name was Nobody, then blinded him with a sharpened, heated stake. As Polyphemus screamed in agony, his neighbors called out, asking who was harming him. He could only yell, "Nobody is hurting me." They left, thinking him mad. It was a perfect trick, but Odysseus' pride ruined it. As they sailed away, he shouted back his real name, allowing the blinded Cyclops to curse him by his father, the sea god Poseidon. This one moment of boastful anger doomed Odysseus to years of further torment, a stark lesson that intelligence without wisdom can be a hollow victory. His journey then led him to the island of the sorceress Circe, a beautiful but deadly host who turned his scouts into swine with a mere touch of her wand. Here, Odysseus faced a different kind of challenge, one of seduction and the threat of losing himself not to force but to comfort. Armed with a protective herb given by the messenger god Hermes, he resisted her magic and instead won her respect. For a full year, he and his crew lived in luxury on her island, their goal of home fading into a distant memory. It took his men to finally shake him from this enchantment, to remind him of their purpose. Leaving Circe required a strength different from battling a Cyclops, the strength to walk away from paradise. The path home, as Circe foretold, only grew more perilous. They had to sail past the sirens, whose beautiful song lured sailors to their deaths on the rocky coast. On her advice, Odysseus ordered his men to plug their ears with wax, but he, burning with curiosity, had himself tied to the mast so he could hear the irresistible melody without being able to steer the ship toward it. He heard their promises of infinite knowledge thrashing against his bonds, begging to be released, while his loyal crew, deaf to the music, rowed onward. It was a profound lesson in knowing his own limitations, a deliberate surrender of control to survive. Immediately after, they faced a choice between two horrors, the sea monster Scylla and the whirlpool Charybdis. There was no victory here, only survival. Circe had told him to sail closer to Scylla, a six-headed beast who would inevitably snatch 6 of his men from the deck. To avoid her meant risking the entire ship in Charybdis vortex. Odysseus made the terrible, calculated decision, steering his ship along the cliff face, listening to the screams of 6 of his crew as Scylla devoured them, a sacrifice to save the rest. This was no glorious battle, but a grim, heartbreaking calculation, the kind of choice that haunts a leader forever. After losing his last ship and all his remaining men, Odysseus finally reached Ithaca alone, a ragged stranger in his own land. But the final test awaited him in his own palace, filled with arrogant suitors vying for his wife Penelope's hand and consuming his wealth. The journey was no longer about monsters and magic, but about patience and strategy. Disguised as a beggar, he endured insults and abuse, biding his time until he could string his great bow and, in a final, bloody confrontation, cleanse his home. The Odyssey is the ultimate story of endurance, a testament to the human spirit's refusal to surrender, even when the gods themselves seem determined to break you. It asks us what we are willing to endure and what parts of ourselves we might have to sacrifice just to find our way back. Odysseus fought for a home he already knew, but another hero carried the ashes of his home on his shoulders, destined to build a new one from the ground up. As Troy burned, the warrior Aeneas did not flee for his own safety, but for a future ordained by the gods. He carried his elderly father on his back and held his young son's hand, leading a band of survivors from the ruins with a divine mandate to find a new land in the west. This was not a journey of return, but of foundation, a burden far heavier than any personal quest. Their voyage across the Mediterranean was plagued by storms and hardship, a reflection of the chaos left in the wake of Troy's fall. Exhausted and desperate, they found temporary refuge on the shores of Carthage, a burgeoning city ruled by the formidable Queen Dido. Here, Aeneas faced a temptation as perilous as any monster, the temptation of a different life. He and Dido fell into a deep and passionate love, a romance that offered him everything he had lost: stability, companionship, and a kingdom. For a time, the weight of his destiny seemed to lift. But the gods reminded him sharply of his duty, sending Mercury to command him to leave. His choice was agonizing: to abandon the woman he loved and break her heart, or to abandon the future of his people. When he set sail, Dido, consumed by grief and betrayal, built a funeral pyre and cursed him and his descendants with eternal enmity before taking her own life. From his ship, Aeneas saw the ominous glow of the flames against the night sky, a tragic reminder that some choices scar the soul forever. To fully understand the path ahead, Aeneas needed to journey where no living man was meant to go. Guided by the Sibyl of Cumae, he descended into the underworld. This was not a raid for a prize, but a quest for knowledge. He witnessed the tormented souls of the dead, including a silent, grieving Dido. Finally, he met the spirit of his father, Anchises, who showed him a breathtaking vision of the future, a parade of the great souls who would one day be born from his bloodline, the legendary founders and heroes of Rome. This revelation transformed his entire mission. He was no longer just a refugee, he was the ancestor of an empire. Armed with this profound certainty, Aeneas finally reached the coast of Italy, only to find that his destiny would be won not through arrival but through war. The local Latin tribes, spurred by the fury of a spurned rival and the lingering shadow of Dido's curse, rallied against him. The final battles were brutal and personal, culminating in a duel with Turnus, the great hero of the Latins. In his final act, Aeneas defeated Turnus, securing the land for his people, but it was a victory stained with the raw anger of his own losses. So why did this myth feel so urgent to the people of ancient Rome? The poet Virgil was not merely recording an old tale, he was writing a national epic on the direct orders of Emperor Augustus. Augustus needed to unify a fractured Rome after decades of civil war, and what better way than to give the empire a divine and heroic origin story? By connecting Rome's foundation to the fallen glory of Troy and a hero obedient to the gods, Virgil provided a glorious past that legitimized the new empire's power. The Aeneid was a masterwork of political storytelling, a myth crafted to convince an entire civilization that its destiny was always written in the stars. While Aeneas carried the weight of an empire, another hero faced a punishment designed to crush his spirit entirely. Hercules, born with godlike strength, was driven by a fit of madness to murder his own wife and children. To atone for this unspeakable crime, he was sentenced to serve his weak and spiteful cousin, King Eurystheus, who devised 12 labors of impossible cruelty. This was not a quest for glory, but a grueling path to purification through suffering. The first task set the tone for the horrors to come, to bring back the skin of the Nemean lion, a beast whose hide was impervious to any weapon. Hercules quickly realized his club and arrows were useless. Using his raw power, he wrestled the monster, eventually strangling it with his bare hands. He then faced the problem of skinning it, a task he solved with the creature's own razor-sharp claws, fashioning its invulnerable pelt into his iconic armor. Next, he was sent to slay the Lernaean Hydra, a monstrous serpent with multiple heads. For every head he crushed or cut off, 2 more would grow in its place, a perfect metaphor for a problem that only worsens the more you fight it. Hercules adapted, calling on his nephew for help. As he severed each head, his companion swiftly cauterized the stumps with a burning torch, preventing regrowth. He saved the immortal head for last, burying it under a heavy rock, finally conquering the multiplying horror. The third labor was a test of speed and endurance to capture the Cyrenian hind, a deer so swift its hooves barely touched the ground. This was no beast of destruction, but a sacred animal to the goddess Artemis. Hercules pursued it for an entire year, not daring to harm it, finally capturing it with a net, showing that restraint could be as important as force. His fourth task was to bring back the Erymanthian boar, a creature of such brute force it terrorized the countryside. Hercules chased the boar into deep snow, exhausting it, and carried the massive, struggling beast back to the king, who was so terrified he hid in a large bronze storage jar. The fifth labor was a different challenge altogether: to clean the vast Augean stables in a single day. This was a seemingly humiliating chore, but the stables housed thousands of cattle and had not been cleaned in 30 years. Instead of attempting the impossible with a shovel, Hercules used his mind, rerouting 2 entire rivers to wash the filth away in a single, spectacular torrent. This demonstrated that cleverness could achieve what brute strength alone could not. The sixth labor pitted him against the Stymphalian birds, man-eating creatures with metallic feathers they could launch like arrows. They nested in a swamp, making them nearly impossible to reach. Hercules used a giant bronze rattle, a gift from the goddess Athena, to startle the massive flock into the air, where he could shoot them down with his poisoned arrows. For the seventh labor, he was sent to the island of Crete to capture the Cretan bull, a magnificent but savage beast that was the father of the Minotaur. Hercules subdued it with sheer strength and sailed back to the mainland with the powerful creature as his prisoner. The eighth labor required him to fetch the man-eating mares of Diomedes, 4 horses trained to consume human flesh. Hercules defeated their king and fed him to his own animals, calming them enough to be led away. The ninth task was to obtain the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. This began as a diplomatic mission, but through the machinations of the goddess Hera, it erupted into a violent conflict, forcing Hercules to fight the legendary warrior women to claim the prize. The 10th labor sent him to the edge of the known world to steal the cattle of the monster Geron, a giant with 3 heads and 3 bodies. Hercules had to cross the vast Libyan desert, and in his frustration, he shot an arrow at the sun itself. The sun god Helios, impressed by his audacity, lent him a giant golden cup to sail across the ocean to Geron's island, where he slew the monster and began the long journey herding the cattle home. The 11th labor was perhaps the most esoteric: to steal the golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides, which was guarded by a 100-headed dragon. Hercules could not complete this alone. He needed the help of the Titan Atlas, who held up the sky. Hercules offered to shoulder the celestial burden himself if Atlas would retrieve the apples. When Atlas returned, he tried to leave Hercules with the eternal weight, but the hero tricked him into taking the sky back, securing the apples through a combination of strength and guile. The final labor was a descent into the underworld itself to capture Cerberus, the massive 3-headed hound that guarded the gates of the dead. With the permission of Hades, Hercules entered the land of shadows, found the beast, and using only his own power, wrestled it into submission, dragging the living nightmare back to the world above. King Eurystheus, upon seeing the Hound of Hell, cowered once more in his jar, begging Hercules to return it. So what do these impossible feats represent beyond a hero's punishment? Historians see in these labors a possible map of early Greek exploration and the taming of the wild. The Nemean lion's territory was a real region, and its myth could symbolize the clearing of dangerous predators from newly settled lands. The Hydra's swampy home at Lerna was an actual place, and the creature may personify the seemingly endless struggle against flooding or disease. The Augean stables might reflect early engineering projects to control water for sanitation. The journey for Geron's cattle mirrors real trade routes to the far west, to places like Spain, where Greeks would have heard tales of rich herds. The labors of Hercules are a story of redemption, but they are also the story of civilization pushing back the chaos of the untamed world, one impossible task at a time. Hercules atoned for his crimes through brutal labor, but the Knights of Camelot sought a prize that could never be won by strength alone. Their quest was for the Holy Grail, the cup used by Christ at the Last Supper, a relic so sacred it could only be perceived by a soul in a state of perfect purity. This was not a journey across mountains or seas, but an inward voyage into the human heart. King Arthur's knights, the finest warriors in the land, set out from the Round Table, each taking a separate path into the tangled forests of Britain. For most, the quest was a profound failure. Sir Lancelot, the greatest fighter of them all, was tormented by his secret, sinful love for Queen Guinevere. He once came within sight of the Grail, feeling its overwhelming power, but was struck down and lay in a trance for 25 days, forbidden from approaching closer. His earthly passions, however noble they seemed, made him unworthy of the divine vision. The quest revealed that the highest treasures are guarded not by dragons, but by our own flaws. Then there was the young Sir Percival, a knight of immense innocence. He encountered the mysterious Fisher King, a wounded ruler whose infirmity mirrored the sickness of his kingdom, the Wasteland. Percival spent a night in the Grail Castle, where he witnessed a strange procession. Servants carried a bleeding lance and the glowing Grail itself, but Percival, trained in chivalry but not in wisdom, failed to ask the crucial question, whom does the Grail serve? His silence was a catastrophic mistake. By morning, the castle was gone, and the opportunity to heal the king and the land had vanished. His failure taught that courage must be paired with compassionate curiosity. The only knight truly successful in the quest was Sir Galahad, the son of Lancelot, conceived for this very purpose. He was the perfect knight, free from any taint of sin. Where Percival failed, Galahad asked the healing question. He restored the Fisher King and the Wasteland, and was granted a vision of the Grail's deepest mysteries. In the end, he did not bring the cup back to Camelot. Instead, after gazing upon the divine, his soul was so filled with light that he asked to die, and the Grail was lifted bodily into heaven, vanishing from the mortal world. But why did this story, so deeply Christian in its imagery, capture such universal appeal? The Grail itself has ancient roots. Long before it was a Christian chalice, Celtic myths spoke of magical cauldrons of plenty that could restore life and provide endless food. The wounded king and the barren wasteland are themes found in pre-Christian fertility legends. The medieval storytellers wove these older, pagan ideas of a land and its ruler being spiritually linked into a new Christian framework. The Grail thus evolved from a physical object into a profound symbol. It became the ultimate prize of spiritual enlightenment, a state of divine grace that requires absolute purity, self-knowledge, and the courage to ask the right questions, not just of the world but of ourselves. It asks what wounds we carry that keep our own personal landscapes barren, and what question we have been too afraid to voice. The Holy Grail demanded spiritual purity, but the very first epic quest in human history sought something far more primal: to conquer death itself. Etched onto clay tablets in ancient Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of a king who was 2/3 god and 1/3 man, a tyrant of such immense strength and restless energy that his people cried out to the gods for relief. Their answer was not a weapon but a mirror, the wild man Enkidu. Created from clay and set loose in the wilderness, Enkidu was a force of nature, running with the animals and thwarting hunters. But when he was lured to the city and confronted Gilgamesh, their battle shook the very walls of Uruk. It ended not in death, but in a profound and instant friendship, the first true human connection for both of them. This bond tamed the wild man and humanized the god king, giving Gilgamesh a purpose beyond his own glory. Together, they embarked on a grand adventure to the cedar forest, a sacred realm guarded by the monstrous Humbaba. This was no simple monster slaying. It was an act of profound sacrilege, chopping down the protected trees of the gods. When they faced Humbaba, the creature's terrifying roar was like a flood, his breath like fire, and his face a twisted labyrinth of entrails. Yet, in a moment of pity, Gilgamesh hesitated to strike the final blow. It was Enkidu who urged him on, warning that if they did not kill the monster now, their fame would be lost forever. With that act, they sealed their own doom, earning the wrath of the gods. Back in Uruk, the goddess Ishtar, offended by Gilgamesh's rejection of her advances, unleashed the bull of heaven upon the city. Together, the friends triumphed again, tearing the celestial beast apart in a display of ultimate defiance, but the price for their hubris was devastating. The gods decreed that Enkidu, the wild man made human through friendship, must die. Gilgamesh watched in helpless horror as his other half was consumed by a slow, wasting sickness, and his grief was a storm that shattered the mighty king. Holding his friend's lifeless body, Gilgamesh confronted the rotting, ugly reality of death for the first time. If a hero as vibrant as Enkidu could be reduced to clay, then what hope was there for anyone? This terror ignited his final and most desperate quest. He would find Utnapishtim, the Mesopotamian Noah, the only mortal ever granted eternal life by the gods. His journey took him to the ends of the earth, through a tunnel under a mountain where the sun travels at night, a place of total darkness where the only light came from the jewels on the plants. He crossed the waters of death and finally stood before the ancient flood survivor. Gilgamesh demanded the secret, but Utnapishtim offered a simple, crushing test. If you want to defeat sleep, the younger brother of death, then stay awake for 7 days. The exhausted king immediately failed, falling into a deep slumber. As a final, cruel proof, Utnapishtim's wife baked a loaf of bread for each day he slept. The moldy, stale loaves lined up beside the fresh one, a timeline of his failure. In pity, Utnapishtim did grant Gilgamesh one chance, telling him of a plant that grew at the bottom of the sea, a thorny flower that could restore a man's youth. Gilgamesh dove deep, retrieved the plant, and began his journey home triumphant. But on the road, as he paused to bathe in a cool pool, a serpent slithered from the water and stole the plant, immediately shedding its skin and becoming young again. Gilgamesh sat on the shore and wept. He returned to the walls of Uruk with no treasure, no secret, and no escape from mortality. His only prize was the wisdom carved into his own story, that the only immortality available to humanity is the fame of great deeds and the enduring walls of a city built to shelter its people. This 4,000-year-old epic asks the same question we still face today. How do we build a meaningful life when we know it must end? The story of Gilgamesh ends with a man weeping on a riverbank, his hope for immortality stolen by a serpent. But across the ancient world, other heroes were setting sail not to escape death, but to find a different kind of paradise. From the misty shores of Ireland comes the wondrous voyage of Bran mac Febble. One day, while walking near his fort, Bran discovered a branch of silver with white blossoms, a thing of impossible beauty. As he carried it into his hall, a woman suddenly appeared, her form shimmering with an unearthly light. She sang to him of a distant world beyond the sea, a place called the Land of Women, where there was no sorrow, no sickness, and no death, only endless feasting and joy. Her song was so powerful, so intoxicating, that it erased all other thoughts from his mind. The very next day, Bran gathered a crew and set sail, not for trade or conquest, but to find this magical realm, steering his boat into the vast, unknown Western Ocean. His journey was a passage through a world of marvels. He and his men sailed past an island of constant, joyful laughter, a sound so pure it lifted their hearts. They encountered a towering figure walking across the waves, who revealed himself as the sea god Manannán mac Lir, riding his chariot over his own kingdom. The god sang to them of the beauty of the sea, describing the waves as fields of flowering clover and the fish as a great, migrating flock. This was not a physical journey alone, but a shift in perception, a lesson in seeing the magic hidden within the natural world. Finally, as promised, they reached the Land of Women. The queen of this island threw a ball of string that magically stuck to Bran's hand, pulling his ship irresistibly to the shore. They were welcomed with open arms into a land of perpetual delight, where every feast lasted for years yet felt like a single day, and the very air seemed to sparkle with contentment. For what seemed like a timeless age, they lived in perfect happiness, but the human heart is tethered to memory, and one of Bran's men was seized by a powerful homesickness. He begged to return to Ireland just for a glimpse of their old shores. The Queen warned them gravely not to set foot on the land, but the pull of the past was too strong. They sailed back to Ireland, finding their harbour strangely familiar yet changed. When Bran called out to people on the shore, they told him the name of Bran Macfebel was only an ancient legend, a story from centuries past. In his despair, one of his companions leaped from the boat onto the land. The moment he touched the soil, he crumbled into a pile of dust as if centuries instantly claimed him. Bran and his crew had been away not for years but for hundreds of years, lost to the timelessness of the otherworld. Realizing their terrible mistake, they turned their ship back toward the endless ocean, never to be seen again. This haunting myth is far more than a simple fairy tale. It speaks directly to the deep-seated beliefs and real-world experiences of the Celtic people. For the Irish, the sea was not a barrier but a pathway to the otherworld, a realm of gods and spirits that existed just beyond the veil of the visible world. These stories of magical islands to the west, like the Land of Women or the mythical High Brassel, may very well be mythological echoes of actual seafaring voyages. Imagine early Irish sailors, perhaps blown off course, catching sight of a distant, fog-shrouded island like the Faroes or even the coast of Iceland. Returning home with tales of these strange, beautiful lands, their accounts would have been woven over generations into the rich tapestry of myth. The allure of these places was their promise of a life free from the hardship and brevity of mortal existence, a powerful dream for people living in a demanding world. The story of Bran is a beautiful, tragic warning about the double-edged sword of such a dream. It offers a paradise beyond all imagining, but at the ultimate cost, the loss of your own place in the world you left behind. While Bran sailed west into a timeless paradise, another king of his own domain was forced to journey in the opposite direction. In the Chinese epic journey to the west, the Monkey King, Sun Wukong, begins not as a humble pilgrim but as a celestial rebel. Born from a stone nourished by the heavens, he mastered magic, conquered the four oceans, and defied the very gods, proclaiming himself the great sage equal to heaven. His punishment for such audacity was not death but containment, imprisoned for 500 years under a mountain by the Buddha himself. His release came with a condition: he must use his immense power not for chaos but for protection. His task was to guard the gentle monk Xuanzang on a perilous pilgrimage from China to the Western Heaven, India, to retrieve sacred Buddhist scriptures. This was a quest for redemption, a chain on a force of nature. The journey was a test of 81 calamities, a number signifying the trials one must overcome to achieve perfection. But these were not just physical battles, they were battles of spirit. Sun Wukong, with his cloud somersault and shape-shifting abilities, saw most obstacles as puzzles to be smashed. He faced demons disguised as innocent villagers, spirits hiding in sacred mountains, and monsters who sought to eat the monk Xuanzang, believing his pure flesh would grant them immortality. In every conflict, Wukong's first and favorite solution was his magic staff, Rui Jingu Bang, which could grow to pierce the sky or shrink to the size of a needle. His brute force, however, often created new problems, leading to lectures from his master about compassion and patience. He was joined by two other disciples, the gluttonous Zhu Beiji, a former celestial marshal now trapped in the body of a pig man, and the silent, dependable Sha Wujing, a fallen river god. This unlikely fellowship was the heart of the story, a constant tension between divine purpose and deeply flawed personalities. Zhu Beiji's earthly desires for food and comfort constantly threatened to derail their mission, while Sha Wujing's quiet loyalty provided a steadying balance. Their dynamic turned the epic into a profound satire, not of faith but of human and inhuman weakness. Why would a story about a Buddhist monk be dominated by a rebellious monkey? The answer lies in its layered origins. the historical monk Xuanzang did make an incredible journey to India in the 7th century, returning with volumes of Buddhist texts. But over centuries, his real-life travels were woven together with ancient Chinese folklore and Taoist immortals, all filtered through a distinctly Chinese lens. Sun Wukong, the ultimate individual, represents the untamed mind full of arrogance and cunning. The monk Xuanzang represents the quest for enlightenment itself, pure but vulnerable. The journey is an allegory for the Buddhist path, where the 81 trials are the distractions and attachments a person must conquer to achieve nirvana. Sun Wukong's eventual triumph is not just the defeat of a demon, but the taming of his own heart, a lesson that true strength lies in mastering the self. While the Monkey King sought enlightenment in the east, a very different kind of magic echoed through the frozen forests of the north. In Finland's national epic, the Kalevala, we meet not a rebellious youngster, but an ancient bard, Väinämöinen, a being whose wisdom and powerful songs could shape the world itself. His greatest quest was not for personal redemption, but for the prosperity of his people, centered on a mysterious object known as the Sampo. Forged by a legendary smith from the tip of a swan's quill, the milk of a barren cow, and a single grain of barley, the Sampo was a magical device of almost limitless creation. Its lid spun like a mill, grinding out salt, money, and grain, bringing boundless wealth to its owner. This was not a treasure to be wielded in battle, but a foundation for a thriving society. The problem was, the Sampo was in the possession of the powerful and vengeful sorceress Lauhai, the mistress of the dark northern land of Pohjola. Väinämöinen, along with the cunning smith Ilmarinen and the young warrior Lemminkainen, devised a plan to steal it back. Their journey to Pohjola was a mythic adventure in itself, filled with obstacles conjured by Lauhai. She sent a terrifying sea monster to block their ship, but Väinämöinen choked the beast with a spell. She summoned a colossal eagle to attack them, but the heroes fought it off. This was a battle of wits and primordial magic, not just brute force. They finally reached Lauhai's fortress and, through a combination of song and deception, managed to locate the Sampo. They tore the great artifact from its stone base and fled by sea, the Sampo hidden in their ship, but the loss did not go unnoticed. Lauhai raised a terrible army and gave chase, transforming herself into a monstrous bird to lead the assault. A colossal battle erupted on the waves. In the chaos, the Sampo was shattered, its pieces scattering into the sea. Lauhai managed to salvage only a small, broken fragment, which she cursed to bring only minimal fortune to her land. The vast majority of the pieces were lost forever, yet even this was a kind of victory. The fragments that sank to the bottom of the sea, the myths say, are the source of the ocean's wealth, the reason the sea yields so much fish. The small piece that washed ashore brought what little fertility the harsh northern soil could offer. This was not a clean victory, but a messy, compromised one, a deeply resonant ending for a people familiar with a hard climate. Väinämöinen's journey did not end there. In his old age, he even ventured to the underworld, Tuonla, seeking knowledge. He was forced to confront his own mortality, navigating the river of the dead and speaking with its inhabitants, only to return with the sober understanding that some secrets are not for the living. So why did this collection of ancient songs become the heart of Finnish identity? For centuries, Finland was under Swedish and then Russian rule, its language and culture suppressed. In the 19th century, a country doctor named Elias Lönnrot traveled the countryside, meticulously collecting the old rune songs sung by the common people. He wove these disparate fragments into a single, coherent epic, the Kalevala, publishing it in 1835. This was not merely an act of preservation, it was an act of creation. The Kalevala gave the Finnish people a heroic past, a mythology to rival the Norse Eddas or the Greek epics, proving they had a rich cultural heritage entirely their own. It became a cornerstone of the national awakening, a source of inspiration that ultimately contributed to Finland's declaration of independence. The story of Vainamarainen and the shattered Sampo is a powerful allegory, a myth that taught a nation how to find prosperity not in a single, unattainable prize, but in the scattered, hard-won blessings of their own land. Far to the east, where the Persian Empire's memory was fading into desert dust, a single poet undertook a labor of his own. Hakem Ferdowsi spent 30 years of his life composing the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, a monumental epic of nearly 60,000 couplets written entirely in pure Persian, a defiant act of cultural preservation. At the heart of this vast chronicle lies the story of Rostam, Iran's greatest champion, and his desperate quest to rescue King Cactus from the clutches of the Divs, the demonic lords of Mazandaran. This was no simple rescue mission. It was a gauntlet of 7 near-impossible trials, each one a test of his divine strength and unshakable loyalty. His legendary stallion, Rakesh, who was as much a hero as his master, carried him into a sleep so deep it seemed enchanted. Upon waking, he discovered a magnificent feast laid out before him, which he gratefully consumed. The owner, a fierce demon, appeared and attacked, but Rostam swiftly beheaded it, only to learn the feast had been a trap set by a sorcerer. This first labor set the tone, a world where nothing was as it seemed. His second trial was a confrontation with pure, primal hunger. A dragon, a creature of such immense size it could swallow a camel whole, emerged from the desert wastes, its body scaled like armor and its breath a toxic poison. Rostam's initial attacks with his sword were useless against its hide. It was Rakesh, ever intelligent, who danced just out of the dragon's reach, tiring the beast and allowing Rostam to find a vulnerable spot under its belly, driving his blade home in a shower of black blood. Next, he faced a different kind of adversary, a witch whose beauty was a lethal weapon. She appeared as a charming woman, offering him food and drink, but Rostam, sensing the deception, used a sacred charm to see her true, horrifying form. He did not hesitate, drawing his sword and cutting her down, understanding that some threats are masked in kindness. His path then led him to the lair of a monstrous div, an ogre whose very presence darkened the land. This was a battle of sheer titanic power, a clash that shook the earth. Rostam wrestled the demon, finally using its own horn as a dagger to slay it, a brutal act of poetic justice. The fifth labor was a test of patience and stealth to infiltrate the fortress of the White Div itself. Disguised as a merchant, he gained entry, his eyes scanning the stronghold for his king. The sixth trial was a battle of wills against a sorcerer who could conjure a blinding, disorienting storm of wind and darkness. Rostam, undaunted, fired a single, perfectly aimed arrow into the heart of the tempest, silencing the magic and the magician both. Finally, he confronted the king of the demons, the White Div, in its innermost sanctum. This was the climax of his journey, a brutal, close-quarters fight where Rostam's raw might and courage triumphed over supernatural evil. He freed the befuddled King Cactus, who had been blinded by the Div's magic but had his sight restored, a symbolic return to clarity and kingship. But why did Ferdowsi pour his life into this story? The Shahnameh is far more than a collection of thrilling adventures. Composed in the 10th and 11th centuries after the Arab conquest had brought Islam to Persia, the epic was a monumental effort to rescue a national identity from the brink of oblivion. Ferdowsi deliberately avoided Arabic words, crafting his epic in a pure Persian that would become a foundation for the modern language. He reached back into the Zoroastrian past, preserving the myths, heroes, and moral code of a pre-Islamic civilization. Rostam is not a prophet or a saint. He is a champion of Iran, a figure of loyalty, strength, and sometimes tragic pride, embodying the virtues of a lost world. Ferdowsi's life's work ensured that the soul of ancient Persia, its kings and its champions, would not be erased by the sands of time, but would live forever in the pages of a book. Deep in the humid heart of the Mayan world, a different kind of underworld awaited its heroes. The Popol Vuh tells of Hunahpu and Xbalanque, the hero twins, whose story begins long before their own birth with the tragic fate of their father and uncle. Those two earlier brothers were summoned to Xibalba, the terrifying realm of the dead, after their noisy ball-playing disturbed the lords of decay and disease. The death gods were tricksters, offering death traps disguised as hospitality, and the first brothers fell for everyone. They were given a bench that was actually a burning hot cooking stone, and cigars and torches that were designed to slice them like blades. Defeated and sacrificed, their heads were placed in a barren calabash tree as a warning. This was the legacy the hero twins inherited, a challenge from the grave. Their own journey to Xibalba was not a reckless charge, but a deliberate invasion, armed not with brute force, but with a profound understanding of the gods' own twisted games. They knew the lords of Xibalba relied on deception, so they turned deception into their greatest weapon. When offered the same deadly bench, they declined, saying they preferred to sit on the ground. They outsmarted the sentient blades of the cigars and torches by placing fireflies on the tips, making the gods believe they were still lit. They even survived the houses of cold, jaguars, and fire, not by overpowering them, but by surviving the night within each one. Their ultimate victory, however, came through the very act that had doomed their father, the ball game. They challenged the gods to a match on the great ball court of the underworld using a ball that contained a hidden blade. They intentionally lost the game, allowing themselves to be sacrificed, their bodies ground up and thrown into a river, but this was all part of the plan. 5 days later, they resurrected, first appearing as two poor, ragged fishermen who performed miraculous dances. They could burn houses and then restore them, sacrifice each other, and bring one another back to life. The Death Lords, especially the two highest gods, were utterly captivated. They demanded to be part of the magic, to be sacrificed and then resurrected. The twins gladly complied, but when they sacrificed the two chief gods, they simply left them dead, breaking the very cycle of death they had pretended to master. They had defeated the lords of the underworld not by ending death, but by proving that life could emerge from it. So why did this myth of resurrection lie at the foundation of Mayan civilization? The answer is written across their fields. The story of the hero twins is a grand allegory for the life cycle of maize, the sacred crop that sustained their world. The father and uncle buried in the ball court are like dried seeds placed in the dark earth. Their heads in the tree represent the seed's potential for life, which is realized when one head spits into the hand of a maiden, conceiving the hero twins. The twins' own death and grinding is the harvesting and milling of the corn. Their glorious resurrection from the river is the new green shoot bursting from the earth after the rains, a cycle of death and rebirth that happens every single growing season. The Mayans saw their own existence mirrored in the journey of the corn, and the hero twins were the divine expression of that eternal, nourishing return. Their victory did not abolish the underworld, but it gave humanity a promise that from every ending, a new beginning is always possible. Even the mighty Thor could be deceived. After a long journey across the rugged lands of Jotunheim with his companions Loki and Thialfi, the thunder god arrived at the immense fortress of Utgard seeking shelter. The king of the giants, Utgard Loki, welcomed them with a mocking smile and proposed a series of friendly contests, each one a cruel setup designed for their public humiliation. Loki, the god of mischief, stepped forward first, boasting he could eat faster than anyone. A trencher of meat was brought out, and Loki began eating at one end while a giant named Logi started at the other. They met in the middle, but Loki had only consumed the meat, while Logi had devoured the meat, the bones, and the wooden trencher itself. Loki had been soundly beaten. Next, the young human Thialfi, renowned for his speed, raced against a giant named Hugi. Thialfi ran with all his might, but Hugi was so swift he easily outpaced him, reaching the finish line and running back to meet him. Thialfi had lost utterly. Then it was Thor's turn. The king offered him a drinking horn, challenging him to drain it in a single draught, a task the god of thunder assumed would be simple. He took a massive swallow, but the level in the horn barely dropped. He tried again, straining with all his divine might, but could only lower it a little further. He failed the challenge. Next, Utgard Loki dared him to lift a common grey cat from the floor. Thor shoved his shoulder underneath the creature, grunting and heaving, but the best he could manage was to lift one of its paws from the ground. The giants roared with laughter. Enraged, Thor demanded a wrestling match. The king, feigning pity, called forth his old nurse, an ancient woman named Ellie. To Thor's utter shame, the harder he struggled, the more his strength seemed to fail him, until the old woman forced him to one knee. Beaten and humiliated, the group spent the night and left the next morning in disgrace. But Utgard Loki followed them out, finally revealing the truth. Every contest had been an illusion of his magic. Loki had not raced against a giant, but against wildfire itself, which consumes everything. Thialfi had run against thought, which no mortal foot can outpace. The drinking horn Thor struggled with was connected to the sea itself, and his mighty swallows had created the very first tides. The cat was none other than the Midgard serpent, the world-encircling dragon, and lifting its paw had shaken the cosmos. And the old nurse Ellie was old age, whom no one, not even a god, can ever defeat. The journey to Utgard was not a story of failure, but a profound lesson in perception. It reveals a Norse world where reality is fluid and brute strength is often useless against cunning and cosmic scale. The giants were not just stupid brutes, they were masters of illusion, forcing even the strongest god to confront his own limitations. This myth values cleverness and the wisdom to see the world as it truly is, not just as it appears. The giants of Norse myth wielded illusions of cosmic scale, but in the heart of Australia, the landscape itself is a divine and truthful memory. For the Aboriginal peoples, the world was not an illusion to be seen through, but a creation to be walked and sung into being. This genesis happened during the dream time, a sacred era when ancestral beings rose from the earth and moved across a formless world, their epic journeys sculpting every mountain, river, and waterhole. The paths they walked are known as songlines, living maps of the continent woven from story, rhythm, and lore. One of the most profound of these creators is the rainbow serpent, a being of immense power and fertility. In its great journey, it pushed up from beneath the ground, its massive body carving out the riverbeds and valleys. Where it rested, it created deep, permanent waterholes, the source of all life in the arid land. Its movements were not just geological, they were legal, establishing the first codes of behavior, the relationship between people and the land, and the consequences for breaking these sacred laws. The rainbow serpent's journey is not a finished event locked in the past, it is a continuous presence. The land is its body, and the water that flows through the rivers is its lifeblood. To follow a songline is to retrace the steps of these creator beings. This is not done with a paper map, but with a sung map. A traveler who knows the songs for a particular songline can navigate hundreds of miles across the desert, each verse describing the landmarks, the water sources, and the ancestral events that happened there. The song is the territory, a living database of navigation, history, and ecology. To sing the country into existence is to maintain it. These journeys are the ultimate expression of a living culture, where every feature of the world is imbued with meaning and memory. A particular rock formation is not just a rock, it is the resting place of a creator kangaroo. A specific tree is the spear thrown by a warrior ancestor in a great battle. This knowledge is not merely spiritual, it is profoundly practical. The songs detail which plants are in season, where to find food and water, and how to care for the land so it continues to provide. What we might call resource management, they understand as fulfilling a sacred duty to the ancestors who formed the world. This makes the songlines one of the oldest continuous human traditions on Earth, a network of stories that literally holds the knowledge of the continent. The land and the song are inseparable, one cannot be understood without the other. When an elder sings a verse about a waterhole, they are not just recalling a story, they are participating in the same creative power that first shaped it. This transforms the very idea of a journey from a simple movement across space into a spiritual act of co-creation, a way of keeping the world alive with every step and every note sung. A hero's sword could carve a kingdom from the wilderness. In the pages of Japan's oldest chronicle, the Kojiki, we meet Yamato Takeru, a prince whose legendary campaigns were instrumental in forging the identity of a nation. His story begins not with glory but with a father's fear. The emperor, alarmed by his son's wild and brutal nature, sends him away to subdue rebellious chieftains in the western provinces, a clear attempt to either temper the young prince or have him killed in battle. Yamato Takeru's aunt, a priestess, gives him a crucial gift, the magical sword Kusanagi. This was no ordinary blade. It was one of the 3 sacred treasures of the imperial regalia, originally plucked from the tail of an 8-headed serpent by the storm god Susanoo. Armed with this divine authority, the prince embarks on a brutal tour of conquest. He does not merely defeat his enemies, he annihilates them through trickery and overwhelming force. In one land, he tricks the local chieftains into entering a pit trap he has prepared, then sets the grassland on fire, earning his name Yamato Takeru, the brave of Yamato. The sword Kusanagi reveals its true power when a rival warlord lures him into an open field and sets it ablaze. Trapped and facing a fiery death, Yamato Takeru uses the sword to cut down the burning grass around him, and the blade summons a great wind to push the flames back toward his enemies, saving his life and turning their trap against them. This solidified his reputation as a warrior blessed by the gods, but his journey takes a darker, more sorrowful turn as he heads east to pacify the untamed regions. He is no longer the brash youth, but a weary, lonely figure. At one point, he pauses to gaze toward his home, sighing and saying, "My wife, whom I love, is like the young grass." This moment of profound vulnerability reveals the emotional toll of his endless campaigning. The land itself seems to rebel against him. When he attempts to cross a body of water on the plain of Sagamu, a local chieftain lies to him, claiming the water is calm. As Yamato Takeru sets out in his boat, a violent storm rises, summoned by a vengeful local sea god. His current wife, Ototachibana, sacrifices herself to appease the deity, laying a mat upon the waves and walking into the sea to drown, calming the storm so her husband may live. He is left alone, burdened by grief and the weight of his own legend. His final journey is to the plain of Togi, where, weakened and heartbroken, he falls mortally ill. He composes a poignant poem comparing his life to the wilted leaves of the Sasaki plant. Upon his death, his soul refuses to find rest. His body is buried, but his spirit transforms into a magnificent white bird that flies toward the sky, leaving an empty tomb behind. The white bird flies to several locations, each one becoming a sacred burial mound, a site of imperial veneration. So why was this tragic tale of a flawed, sorrowful hero so crucial to the Yamato clan? The Kojiki was compiled in the early 8th century at the direct command of the imperial court. Its purpose was not mere history but political justification. Yamato Takeru's mythical conquests from the western island of Kyushu to the eastern Kanto plain provided a divine and heroic precedent for the Yamato clan's actual military and political expansion. By having their ancestral prince subdue the land with a sacred sword, one of the very symbols of imperial power, the chroniclers were creating an unassailable narrative. They were saying that the current emperor's rule was not just a matter of politics, but the fulfillment of a destiny written by the gods and won by the blood of their heroes. The transformation into a white bird was particularly potent. It did not signal an end, but a transmutation of his power, linking the imperial lineage directly to the spiritual world and the very land he had conquered. His story is a foundation myth, using the epic journey of a single, tragic man to legitimize the rule of an entire dynasty. A king's greatest duty can be to surrender his own throne. This is the profound paradox at the heart of the Ramayana, one of the world's oldest and most revered epics. Prince Rama, the virtuous heir to the kingdom of Ayodhya, is on the cusp of his coronation when his father is forced to honor an old, cruel promise. To uphold the king's word, Rama is exiled for 14 years, stripped of his title, and forced to live as a simple ascetic in the wilderness. He is joined by his deeply loyal wife, Sita, and his devoted brother, Lakshmana. They accept this fate not with anger, but with a solemn commitment to Dharma, the sacred order of the universe. Their peaceful exile is shattered when the demon king Ravana, a 10-headed ruler of immense power and cunning, disguises himself as a holy man. He kidnaps Sita, carrying her away in his flying chariot to his island fortress of Lanka. Rama's personal tragedy now becomes a cosmic quest, a mission to restore balance by defeating a force of ultimate arrogance. His search leads him to the edge of the known world, where he forms an alliance with a most unexpected army, the monkey warriors of the Vanara king, Sugriva. Among them is Hanuman, a being of divine strength, intelligence, and unwavering devotion. It is Hanuman who makes the legendary leap across the ocean to Lanka, finding Sita and confirming she is alive. He returns with a message of hope and a vital assessment of the enemy's strength. The stage is set for an impossible war. Rama orders a bridge to be built across the sea, a feat his monkey army accomplishes by writing the name of Rama on stones, making them float. They cross into Lanka and lay siege to Ravana's golden city. The ensuing battle is a cataclysm of divine weapons, magical illusions, and raw courage. Lakshmana is mortally wounded, and only a magical herb from a distant mountain can save him. Hanuman leaps again, but when he cannot identify the correct plant, he lifts the entire mountain and carries it back to the battlefield. This is not a story of subtlety, but of absolute, selfless devotion. The final confrontation pits Rama against Ravana in a duel for the ages. Rama, the embodiment of righteous duty, faces a foe who is not pure evil, but a complex scholar and devotee of the gods whose own pride has corrupted him utterly. With a single, divinely charged arrow, Rama strikes Ravana down, restoring Sita to her rightful place. Yet the story does not end with a simple reunion. The epic's most challenging moment comes after the victory. Rama, now king, is bound by his duty to his subjects. He questions Sita's purity after her long captivity in another man's house, and though she undergoes a trial by fire to prove her innocence, the whispers of doubt force him to banish her, a heartbreaking decision that highlights the immense, often painful burden of Dharma. The Ramayana's influence did not stop at the shores of India. It traveled with traders and priests across the sea, taking root in the cultures of Southeast Asia. In Thailand, the story is the national epic, the Ramakien, where the characters are woven into the very fabric of royal ceremony and classical dance. In Indonesia, especially on the islands of Java and Bali, the tale of Rama and Sita is performed in shadow puppet plays called wayang kulit, where the flickering images on a screen tell a story that every villager knows by heart. The epic became a shared language of virtue, a template for kingship, and a spiritual guide for hundreds of millions, proving that a journey of the soul can cross any ocean. A hero's legacy can be forged not in a single battle, but in the endless wandering between two worlds. In the rugged highlands of medieval Serbia, the figure of Prince Marko Kraljevic stands as a colossus, part historical prince and part mythical defender. He was a vassal to the Ottoman Sultan, a complex reality that forced him to navigate a tightrope between political submission and fierce protection of his own Christian people. His story is not one of clear-cut rebellion, but of a man carrying the immense burden of his people's survival on his shoulders, his legendary strength a metaphor for their unbroken spirit. This strength was not subtle, it was earth-shaking. He was said to drink wine by the barrel and wield a 15-pound mace as if it were a willow branch, capable of splitting a knight in two with a single casual blow. Yet his true companion in these tales was not his mace but his magical horse, Sharak. This was no ordinary steed, but a wise, talking partner who often displayed more foresight than his master. Sharak could leap across mountain gorges and understood the language of birds and beasts, his loyalty making him an extension of Marco's own soul. Together they roamed the land, their journey a constant vigil against injustice. Marco's enemies were as varied as his loyalties. He would confront Ottoman tax collectors who abused the peasantry, but he would also face monsters from the old Slavic world, like the three-headed dragon Azdoja, a creature that poisoned the wells and devoured livestock. He battled the vile witch Mora, who sat on sleepers' chests and stole their breath. In these encounters, Marco was more than a warrior. He was a guardian of the natural and moral order, a force that stood between common folk and the chaos that threatened to swallow them from all sides. This mythologizing of a historical prince served a profound purpose for the Serbian people living under centuries of Ottoman rule. The real Marco died fighting for the Sultan in a battle against Wallachians, a historical footnote that was inconvenient for a nation yearning for a liberator. So, in the folk songs and epic poems, his story was reshaped. His service to the Sultan was reframed as a clever, necessary ruse, a way to gain the power to protect his people from within the system. His death was transformed into a magical sleep. He did not die, but merely rests in a hidden cave with his beloved Sharak, waiting for the hour of his people's greatest need to awaken and fight once more. Prince Marco's wandering was the journey of a national conscience, a legendary vessel carrying the hope that their strength, though dormant, was never truly broken. A boy who could not walk seemed an unlikely candidate to forge an empire. In the heart of West Africa, the epic of Sundiata Keita begins not with strength but with profound weakness. Born to the king of the small state of Kangaba, the young prince was crippled from childhood, crawling on all fours while his peers ran and played. His mother, Sogolan, was mocked as the buffalo woman, and the court of his father viewed him not as an heir but as a living embarrassment. A cruel and jealous queen, Sasalma Berit, saw to it that after the king's death, her own son took the throne, and Sundiata and his mother were driven into exile. It was a journey of humiliation, a future king reduced to a wandering outcast, yet a prophecy spoken at his birth by holy men foretold that this boy would one day become a great ruler, a king of kings. For years he traveled from kingdom to kingdom, serving different rulers, learning the arts of war and statecraft, and slowly, miraculously, strengthening his legs until he could stand and walk, then run, then fight with unmatched prowess. His legend grew not through his birthright, but through his resilience in exile. The moment to fulfill the prophecy came when the sorcerer King Saumaoro Kant of the Soso Empire conquered his homeland, bringing terror and tyranny. Saumaoro was no ordinary foe, his power was magical. He possessed a dark chamber lined with the skulls of the kings he had defeated, and his skin was said to be invulnerable to any weapon. Sundiata's journey back was a gathering of allies, a patient weaving of alliances through diplomacy and shared grievance. He assembled a coalition of disaffected states, each contributing their strength to his cause. The final confrontation came at the Battle of Karina. As the two great armies clashed, Sundiata knew he could not defeat Saumaoro with strength alone. He had to fight magic with magic, armed with a sacred arrow tipped with the spur of a white rooster, the only substance that could pierce the sorcerer king's enchanted hide. Sundiata faced his enemy. He loosed the arrow, grazing Saumaoro's shoulder. The wound was minor, but it broke the king's protective spell. His power shattered, Saumaoro fled the battlefield and vanished from history, leaving Sundiata the undisputed victor. But why does this story blend historical fact with such vivid sorcery? The Epic of Sundiata is a masterwork of oral history, passed down for centuries by griots, the poet-historians of West Africa. The magical elements are not mere decoration, they are a narrative language used to explain the inexplicable. Saumaoro's invulnerability represents the sheer, daunting power of a seemingly unconquerable enemy. The rooster spur arrow symbolizes the one critical weakness, the precise piece of knowledge or alliance that can topple a tyrant. Sundiata's crippled childhood is a metaphor for the humble origins of the great Maui Empire itself, which grew from a small kingdom into a vast, wealthy realm that controlled the gold and salt trades across the Sahara. His journey from weakness to strength mirrors the empire's own rise, a story told not in dry chronicles, but in a living, breathing epic that made history a part of every listener's identity. A king's greatest shame could be a failure of honor, not of battle. Will, the mortal lord of David, learned this lesson not through a human rival, but by offending a king from another world entirely. While hunting in his own forests, he recklessly set his hounds upon a magnificent stag, only to find a stranger, and his spectral greyhounds had already brought the beast down. This was no ordinary hunter, but Aron, the noble king of Anon, the Celtic otherworld. Enraged by Will's discourtesy, Aron did not demand a duel, but proposed a far more profound test. The two kings, one mortal and one divine, would swap places for the span of a year. Will would rule Anon, while Aron would take Will's form and rule David. This was an exchange of sovereignty itself, a journey into the heart of what it truly means to be a king. Will's only task in Anon was to confront Aron's rival, Hafgan, on the one-year anniversary of his arrival, and to strike him with a single, fatal blow. There was, however, one absolute condition. After defeating Hafgan, Will was forbidden from striking him a second time. He entered Anon, a land both familiar and eerily different, and took the throne beside Aron's beautiful queen. For the entire year, he ruled with wisdom and, most crucially, with immense restraint. He slept each night beside the queen, but never touched her, placing a sword between them as a symbol of his sworn oath. He governed the strange land with justice, earning the respect of its people. When the day of the duel arrived, Will faced Hafgan across a misty ford. He landed the single, decisive blow as instructed. Hafgan, mortally wounded, pleaded for a second strike to finish him, appealing to Will's pride and warrior's honor. But Will remembered his promise. He refused, and with that refusal, Hafgan's power shattered completely. Will had conquered not by force, but by his unwavering word. He returned to his own world, and Aron returned to a kingdom now permanently at peace. The two realms, mortal and otherworld, were bound in a lasting alliance, a friendship forged in mutual respect. This story resonates with the deepest Celtic beliefs about the nature of reality. For them, the world of the living and the world of the gods were not separate realms, but layers of a single existence intimately connected. A king's worth was not measured by his wealth or his conquests, but by his honor and his ability to maintain the sacred bond with the land and its unseen guardians. Will's journey was a test of his fitness to rule, a lesson that true sovereignty flows from integrity, not from a crown. His success brought prosperity to both his people and the land itself, proving that the fate of the mortal world always depends on the strength of its pacts with the world just beyond sight. High on a sacred mountain, a cave opened and gave birth to a dynasty. From the mouth of Pakaratambo emerged the Ayar brothers, 4 men and their 4 sisters, sent into the world by the sun god Intai to bring order to a land of chaos. They were not ordinary travelers, but living embodiments of divine will, carrying a golden wedge that would guide their path. Their leader was Ayar Manco, a figure of wisdom and authority, but the journey would test them in ways they could not foresee. The most powerful of the brothers was Ayar Kachai, whose strength was so immense he could shatter mountains with a single slingshot. His very power, however, bred fear and resentment among the others. His brothers saw his explosive rage not as an asset but as a threat to their sacred mission. They conspired against him, tricking Ayar Kachai into returning to the Cave of Origin to retrieve forgotten treasures. Once he was inside, they sealed the entrance with a massive boulder, trapping him forever in the darkness, but the land itself refused to be silenced. Keita did not die. Instead, he underwent a profound transformation, his spirit merging with the stone of the mountain to become a sacred huoka, an eternal, watchful guardian over the Inca people. His imprisonment was not a murder, but a necessary sacrifice to temper the raw, chaotic power of nature into a stable foundation for civilization. The remaining brothers and sisters continued their pilgrimage guided by the golden wedge. They watched for a sign, a place where the sacred object would sink effortlessly into the earth, indicating fertile soil and divine approval. After a long and arduous trek through the high Andes, they reached a valley where the wedge disappeared into the ground. It was here that Manco drove his staff into the earth, and on that spot he founded the city of Cusco, the navel of the world. Yet the journey was still not complete. One by one, the other brothers also turned to stone, becoming permanent markers of the sacred landscape, their physical forms anchoring the myth to the very geography of the empire. Only Manco, now known as Manco Capac, the first Sopa Inca, remained, ruling alongside his sister wife Mama Oclo. This act of sibling marriage was not strange but essential, establishing the royal bloodline as pure and truly divine, set apart from all other people. So why was this story of fratricide and petrification carved into the heart of an empire? The myth of the Ayar brothers served as the ultimate justification for Inca rule. Every Sopa Inca could trace his lineage directly back to Manco Capac and the sun god Intai, making his authority absolute and unquestionable. The transformation of the brothers into stone huocas created a network of sacred sites that dotted the entire empire, each one a reminder that the land itself belonged to the children of the sun. When the Incas later expanded, conquering neighboring kingdoms, they were not engaging in mere territorial aggression. They were simply reclaiming a world that was, according to their origin story, always meant to be theirs. This myth was a spiritual map that turned conquest into destiny and a king into a living god. Even a goddess could not escape the underworld's pull. Inanna, the queen of heaven, made a choice that defied all divine logic, a conscious decision to abandon her golden temples in the sun-drenched city of Uruk and descend into the land of no return. Her journey was not forced upon her by a vengeful enemy, but was a deliberate, calculated risk to confront her own dark sister, Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld. This was a voyage into a cold, silent realm where the dead lived on dust and clay, a place of such profound emptiness that even a deity's power could be stripped away. At each of the 7 gates leading deeper into the abyss, the gatekeeper, following Ereshkigal's stern orders, demanded a piece of Inanna's divine regalia. First, her shining crown was taken, then her royal rod, her lapis lazuli necklace, and finally the very garments that covered her body. With each gate, a layer of her identity and authority was peeled away until she stood naked and bowed before her sister's throne. This was the ultimate price of entry, a complete surrender of the symbols that defined her power in the world above. In that final, humiliating moment, Ereshkigal fixed the eye of death upon her, and Inanna was turned into a lifeless piece of rotting meat hung on a hook on the wall. Her story could have ended there, a stark warning about the finality of the grave, but the world above had already begun to wither in her absence. The god of wisdom, Enki, intervened from the surface, creating 2 sexless beings who slipped into the underworld unseen. They did not confront Ereshkigal with force, but with a profound and simple empathy. They mirrored her agonized groans, sharing in her loneliness and pain. This unexpected compassion softened the queen of the dead, and she agreed to allow them to revive Inanna with the water and food of life. Yet, the rules of the underworld were absolute. No one could leave without providing a substitute to take their place. As Inanna ascended back through the 7 gates, reclaiming her symbols of power one by one, she was followed by a host of relentless demons, their sole purpose to drag a replacement back to the land of dust. They first looked to her husband, the shepherd god Dumusid, expecting to find him in mourning, weeping for his lost queen. Instead, they found him seated proudly on his throne, dressed in his finest robes and enjoying his rule in her absence. His lack of grief sealed his fate. Inanna, freshly resurrected and perhaps stung by this betrayal of ritual mourning, decreed that he must take her place. Dumusid fled in terror, but after a dramatic chase, the demons captured him and dragged him down into the darkness. His descent was not the end, however. His compassionate sister, Inanna, offered to share his burden, and a compromise was struck. Dumusid would spend half the year in the underworld, and his sister would take his place for the other half. This ancient myth, etched in cuneiform long before the Odyssey or the Bible, is one of humanity's first attempts to explain the brutal, beautiful cycle of the natural world. Inanna's death and resurrection mirror the descent of the sun into the winter sky and its triumphant return in the spring. The fate of Dumusid is the story of the harvest, the god of fertility and herds who must die and be stored away for half the year, only to return when the land turns green again. But it is also a raw, psychological exploration of power. Inanna sought to expand her domain even into the realm of death and learned that such ambition carries a devastating personal cost. Her journey reveals a world not of simple good and evil, but of necessary balance, where life cannot exist without death, and where even the Queen of Heaven must pay a price to touch the mysteries below. Even the sacred halls of Camelot could not contain the call of the wild. A sudden glimpse of a white stag at the edge of the forest was enough to send the entire court rushing for their horses, a chaotic, thrilling hunt that swept knights and ladies alike into the untamed woods. This was no ordinary quarry. Its coat was as pure as snow, and its appearance was always an omen. The chase was never about the kill, for to harm such a creature was unthinkable. It was about the pursuit itself, a sudden detour from the ordered world of the Round Table into a realm of mystery and chance. The moment the white stag was sighted, the predictable rules of chivalry were left behind at the castle gate. The forest path did not lead to a clear destination, but to a labyrinth of choices. Knights who began the hunt together would soon find themselves separated, each taking a fork in the trail that led to a unique and personal adventure. One knight might stumble upon a secluded chapel, another upon a mysterious fountain, and a third might find himself at a ford, challenged by a stranger to a joust. The white stag was a guide, but its true purpose was to lead each seeker to the test they needed most. In the story of Sir Gawain and the white stag, the pursuit leads him directly to a magnificent, empty castle. Here he is tested not with a sword, but with his own word and honor. A lord of the castle offers him a simple game. Whatever the lord wins in his daily hunt, he will give to Gawain, and whatever Gawain receives in the castle, he must give to the lord. For 2 days the exchange is fair, but on the third day, the lady of the castle gives Gawain a magical green girdle that promises to protect him from harm. Torn between his vow and his fear of death, Gawain keeps the girdle, a small failure of honesty that reveals his very human imperfection. The white stag had led him not to glory, but to a profound moment of self-knowledge. So why did this specific animal hold such power in the medieval imagination? The white stag appears in Celtic mythology long before Arthur, often as a messenger from the otherworld, a realm of gods and spirits that existed just beyond the veil of the visible world. Its impossible color marked it as a creature out of place, a sign that the barrier between worlds was thin. For Christian writers, this pagan symbol was easily adapted. The white stag came to represent Christ himself, an elusive figure of divine grace that could guide the soul toward revelation. The endless, unpredictable chase mirrors the human quest for spiritual fulfillment, a goal that can never be truly captured, only pursued. The forest into which the knights ride is more than just a collection of trees. It is the wilderness of the human soul, where destiny awaits around every corner, and the only map is the courage to follow a fleeting glimpse of white through the shadows. A hero's hook could pull islands from the sea. Maui, the great trickster demigod of Polynesian lore, did not conquer his world through brute force alone, but through a clever, almost playful cunning that bent the very laws of nature. His most famous feat began far out in the open ocean, where he let down a fishing line baited with his own blood and a magical hook carved from the jawbone of his grandmother. He chanted a powerful karakia, a prayer that gave the line immense strength, and felt a colossal tug. He hauled with all his might, not pulling up a fish, but an entire landmass, Te Ika e Maui, the great fish of Maui, which we know today as the North Island of New Zealand. His brothers, ignoring his instructions not to look back, began to carve at the still living land with their knives, creating the rugged mountains and deep valleys we see now. This was creation not from nothing, but from a struggle between a demigod's ambition and human impatience. But Maui's journeys were not confined to the sea. He looked to the sky and saw another problem. The sun, Ra, raced across the heavens too quickly, leaving too little time for his mother to dry her bark cloth or for people to finish their work. So Maui wove ropes from strong flax and with the help of his brothers journeyed to the pit where the sun rose. They waited, and as Ra began to climb, they ensnared him with their ropes. Maui then took his magical jawbone hook and beat the sun until it was weakened and humbled, forcing it to promise a slower, more measured journey across the sky, granting humanity the long, productive days we enjoy. How do these impossible stories connect to real human history? The myths of Maui are not just fanciful tales. They are a cultural memory of the single most ambitious period of exploration in human history. For centuries, Polynesian navigators ventured across thousands of miles of trackless Pacific Ocean in double-hulled voyaging canoes. They had no magnetic compasses, no sextants, no charts. Instead, they used a science of wayfinding passed down through generations. They memorized the paths of hundreds of stars, reading the star compass that wheeled overhead. They watched the subtle patterns of ocean swells, feeling how the canoe moved beneath them to detect distant islands long before they were visible. They observed the flight paths of birds, knowing that certain species always flew toward land at dusk. They watched for clouds that gathered stationary over unseen islands, and for the specific shade of green in the water that reflected off a lagoon. The myth of Maui fishing up islands is a poetic reflection of this reality. The moment when a navigator, after weeks at sea, would finally sight a new land, pulling it from the endless blue horizon as if by magic. His slowing of the sun speaks to the navigator's intimate, essential relationship with the celestial world, where the sun, moon, and stars were not distant gods but vital tools for survival. These myths provided the spiritual courage for a reality that was almost unimaginable, setting sail into the emptiness with the faith that, like Maui, they could pull a new home from the depths. A king can be born not in a palace but in a humble tent, chosen by the gods to cleanse a world drowning in chaos. This is the story of King Jessar, the hero of the world's longest epic, a sprawling oral tradition that dwarfs the Iliad and the Odyssey combined. He entered the world not as a helpless infant, but as a divine being, sent to the suffering kingdom of Ling to defeat the demons and warlords who had plunged the land into darkness. His early life was a test of obscurity, living in exile and poverty, disguised as a simple, unattractive boy named Joru. While the nobles of Ling schemed for power, this overlooked child was already gathering his future allies and biding his time, his true nature hidden from a world not yet ready for its savior. His moment arrived during a great horse race, the winner of which would be crowned King of Ling. On a magical steed, he cast aside his disguise, revealing his radiant, heroic form and easily winning the contest. But his coronation was only the beginning of his true labor. Jessar's reign became an endless campaign, a series of epic journeys to subdue the four great demons of the four directions. Each demon represented a different kind of evil, from the northern demon who spread plague and disease to the demon of the west who hoarded the nation's wealth. These were not simple battles of sword and spear, but wars of spiritual conquest. Jessar would often use cunning and magic, transforming himself or employing powerful rituals to defeat his foes, restoring balance and prosperity to the land with each victory. So why has this story been recited and sung for 1,000 years across the high plateaus of Tibet and the steppes of Central Asia? For Tibetan Buddhists, Jessar is more than a legendary king. He is an emanation of an enlightened being, a protector of the Dharma. His epic battles are an allegory for the internal struggle within each person, the fight to conquer the inner demons of greed, hatred, and ignorance. The bards who recite his story, often in performances that can last for weeks, are considered vessels for divine inspiration. Their songs a living scripture that transmits cultural values and spiritual teachings. This monumental epic is not locked in a book. It is a living, breathing force, a mythic map that guides a people through the stark beauty of their landscape and the profound depths of their faith. Their divine mandate was not found in a city, but in a vision at the edge of a lake. For the Mexica people, the long, arduous migration from the misty island of Aztlan was a sacred undertaking, a generations-long pilgrimage directed by the fierce voice of their tribal god, Huitzilopochtli. He spoke through his priests, promising them a destined homeland, a place of their own after decades of wandering through deserts and serving as mercenaries for more powerful kingdoms. The god's instructions were precise but cryptic, a sign they would know only when they saw it, an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a serpent. This image was not merely a landmark, it was a cosmic blueprint for their future. Their journey was a brutal test of faith. They carried the effigy of Huitzilopochtli with them, and his demands shaped their path. At one crucial stop, the god commanded a shocking act. The heart of a princess of a rival tribe was to be torn out and her skin flayed, with a priest then wearing her skin in a gruesome ritual. This divine order cemented their identity as the people of the sun, bound to nourish their god with the most precious offering, human life itself. It was a declaration that they were separate, chosen, and unafraid of the terrible duties required for their survival. After more than a century of movement, they finally arrived at the vast lake system of the Valley of Mexico. There, on a small, swampy island, they saw the impossible. Just as Huitzilopochtli had foretold, a majestic eagle stood upon a prickly pear cactus, its wings spread wide to the sun, a writhing serpent gripped in its talons. In that single, powerful image, the wandering ended. The Mexica had found their promised land. They named the place Tenochtitlan, and on that unlikely, marshy ground, they began the monumental task of building their city, driving wooden pilings into the lakebed to create chinampas, the floating gardens that would feed a metropolis, and erecting a grand temple to their patron god. This origin story, however, was far more than a simple legend of discovery. It was a masterwork of political ideology. The Mexica, who would later form the powerful Aztec Triple Alliance, were relative newcomers to a valley already filled with ancient, established city-states. Their myth of a divine, preordained journey gave them a legitimacy they otherwise lacked. By claiming direct guidance from Huitzilopochtli, they asserted that their right to rule was not just earned by the sword, but was written in the stars and confirmed by a miraculous sign. The eagle and the cactus became the symbol of their empire, a constant reminder that their power was not an accident of history, but the fulfillment of a prophecy, a destiny pulled from the waters by divine command. Yet even a divinely guided empire could not shield a soul from its own inner turmoil. 700 years ago, a Florentine poet named Dante Alighieri found himself lost in a dark wood, his life in ruins, his political hopes shattered, and his path forward utterly obscured. From that profound personal despair, he crafted a journey that would map the entire cosmos of the medieval Christian soul. The Divine Comedy is not merely a poem, it is an epic of spiritual cartography, guiding the reader on a meticulously detailed tour of the afterlife, from the frozen pit of hell to the radiant presence of God. His guide through the first two realms is the Roman poet Virgil, a symbol of human reason. Together, they descend through the 9 concentric circles of hell, a terrifying inverted mountain where punishments are not arbitrary tortures, but the perfect physical expression of the sins themselves. The lustful are forever blown about by a violent storm, mirroring the chaos of their passions. The gluttonous lie in a freezing slush, punished by the very elements they consume to excess. The deeper they go, the more severe the sins become, from violence and heresy to the ultimate treachery, where Satan himself is frozen in a lake of ice, eternally chewing on the 3 greatest betrayers in history, Judas, Brutus, and Cassius. This harrowing descent is a masterclass in moral consequence, where every soul is imprisoned not by a vengeful God, but by the logical outcome of their own choices. Emerging on the other side of the world, Dante and Virgil arrive at the base of the mountain of purgatory. This is a place not of eternal damnation, but of hope and purification. Here, the penitent willingly endure punishments designed to heal, not to harm. The proud are bent double under heavy stones, learning humility. The envious have their eyelids sewn shut with iron wire, forcing them to look inward. Each level scrubs away a different vice, and as souls ascend, the mountain grows lighter until they reach the earthly paradise at its summit. Here, Virgil, representing reason, must depart, for human intellect alone cannot enter heaven. Dante's guide now becomes Beatrice, the woman he loved from afar, who represents divine revelation and theology. With her, he ascends through the celestial spheres of paradise, moving past the moon, the planets, and the fixed stars, each sphere representing a higher degree of blessedness and virtue. The journey culminates in the Empyrean, beyond space and time, where he is granted a vision of the divine as a radiant point of light surrounded by 9 concentric rings of angels and saints. This final, ineffable sight of God is the ultimate destination, the moment where the individual soul is finally reunited with the source of all love. But why did this intensely personal, theological poem become one of the foundational works of Western culture? Dante wrote in the vernacular Italian, not scholarly Latin, making his epic accessible to the common person and essentially forging a national language. His vivid, imaginative depictions of the afterlife shaped how generations of artists from Botticelli to Doré would visualize heaven and hell. More profoundly, he gave the world a universal story of redemption, a journey that begins in confusion and despair, is disciplined by reason, and is ultimately completed by love. The Divine Comedy offers a powerful answer to the same question faced by Gilgamesh and Odysseus. How do we find our way? For Dante, the path was not outward across the sea, but inward through the darkest woods of the self, upward toward the light. From the grief of Gilgamesh to the final vision of Dante, these 25 journeys form a constellation of human yearning. Whether a hero seeks a golden fleece, a sacred cup, or a path back home, the same profound themes echo across continents and millennia. Each quest is ultimately a story of transformation, where a character is forged in the crucible of trial, emerging forever changed. They confront the shadow of death, either literally in the underworld or metaphorically in the loss of a companion, forcing them to grapple with the fundamental terms of existence. And underpinning it all is the relentless search for meaning, for a purpose that justifies the struggle, be it the founding of a city, the restoration of order, or a glimpse of divine grace. These ancient stories still speak to us because they are not about superhuman feats alone, but about the universal human experience. They are about the journey we all undertake, navigating the dark forests of doubt, the seductive islands of comfort, and the towering mountains of our own ambitions. They remind us that the call to adventure, to growth, and to understanding is as urgent today as it was 4,000 years ago. Which of these mythical quests resonated most deeply with you? Share your favorite journey in the comments below and subscribe to continue unraveling the greatest historical mysteries